Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. I think everyone knows me. I'm Joanne Levy, President of the Sephardi Synagogue, and it is a pleasure and an honour to welcome Charlie German, who's coming to be our guest for our afternoon chat today. So thank you Charlie, for your time and for honouring us and sharing us with your experiences. So I think the way that we're going to do this now is if you'd like to talk for about 20 minutes, and then I'll allow 10 minutes for any questions. If we don't have any questions, you can just keep talking. Now, I know that you're very good at speaking. You speak at the Holocaust Centre. So we will just, I'm going to put the spotlight onto you and we're just going to sit back and listen to you. So thank you very much. And I'm just going to start. So if you'd like to start talking now. Thank you very much, Charlie.
Good afternoon, and thank you for your patience. I'm sorry we were having the technical difficulties. Basically, very quickly, because we don't have all the time, my name is Charles German. It was originally Chaim Schmatnik, and I was born in Romania, and I'm a child survivor of the Holocaust. I was born in 1936 to a middle-class family in the province of Bukovina, which in the city of Czernowitz, which actually was the capital of Bukovina. When I was invited to give this testimony, I pondered on how one can convey the story of one's suffering and how my story as a child survivor is different from any other child or adult survivor. My story, it can't be different. And yet the suffering is very similar and the same. Every Holocaust survivor has his or her own story to tell. But this is my story, and it's from the view of a child. I was 5 years old when we were taken into the concentration camp in the Ukraine. The Ukrainians were a lot worse, if that is possible, than the German guards, the way they treated the survivors. Just to recount sort of the history of Czernowitz. Czernowitz was what was called a Yiddish city. 100 and something years ago, there was a first Yiddish conference held in Czernowitz with some of the most renowned Yiddish writers, and including Chaim Nachman Bialik and several others. In 1940, the Russian army occupied Czernowitz and the surrounding area. They created a lot of havoc and a lot of rape and pillage of the Jewish people, but that wasn't as bad as in July 1941, the Romanian army retook the city together with the Germans. And that's when it really, really became very, very hard for us. The Russians, while they occupied the city, took the intelligentsia, our clever people, our business people, our shopkeepers, our doctors and lawyers, they took them away to Russia, including my uncle. And we never heard from my uncle again, nor have anybody, to the best of my knowledge, ever heard from any of the ones the Russians took. And then when the Germans started, they, first of all in Czernowitz, placed us in a ghetto where they crammed 50,000 Bukovinian Jews into a very, very small area, and 20 to 30 people to a house or even a room. It was just atrocious situation to be in. And that was before they started deporting us. But in the meantime, they gathered 400 Jewish men and just took them to the outskirts of the city and just shot every one of them just because they could and just because they were Jews. Amongst those 400 were my uncles, Salo and Monu, both very young men. The older brother, Moritz, was taken by the Russians to Siberia, as I said, with many others, and never heard of again. To some extent, the Chernovitz Jews were lucky. The mayor of Chernovitz, Mr. Troyan Popovici, managed to persuade the minister Antonescu to exclude 20,000 Jews from being transported to Transnistria, to the killing fields of Transnistria. A little bit more about Transnistria later, but amongst the people that Trojan Popovici saved was my grandmother and two of my aunties. In 1944, the Axis were driven out and the Red Army occupied the city and then incorporated in part of the USSR. And over the following years, most of the Jews that were able to left for Israel. The city of Chernovitz was actually a center, one of the most important action stations for the Bricha. Now, most people I speak to have never heard of the Bricha. The Bricha were Jewish soldiers that had been in the British Army in the special division that Churchill finally allowed the Jews to fight the Second World War. There was the Jewish brigade of 6,000 men fought bravely in Europe, but Churchill would not allow them into Germany. However, a lot of the men in their own time, in their own mindset, quietly absconded from the British Army, and wherever possible, they pursued known Nazis, Nazi soldiers, and Ukrainian collaborators. They worked in such a way that they saved literally thousands of Jews by transporting them illegally in trucks to ports in Italy. Now, the question arises, where did the Bricha get the trucks from? The British brigade was already disbanded and sent back to Palestine. However, very, very smartly, they exchanged 150 approximately British Jewish Palestinian soldiers with refugees. They dressed the refugees up as British soldiers to make up the 6,000 that had to go back to Palestine. So what we have is 150 approximately trained Jewish soldiers of the Bricha that were illegally transporting people around from occupied countries to Italy, to the ports of embarkation to Palestine. Now, back to myself, we, and I included, with the Jews from Chernovitz, were taken across the river Dniester to a place in the Ukraine called Mogilev-Podolsky. Now, we were taken by train from Chernovitz to a place on the river Dniester called Ataki. Now, the train trip, depending on the time, in cattle cars, crowded together without water, without food, without toilet facilities, took between 3 and 4 days. When the trains finally arrived at Ataki, the first thing that we had to do, and with the pushing and shoving and prodding by rifle bayonets by the Germans and the Ukrainians, we had to empty the cattle cars of the dead. It was, from a point of view of a child, incomprehensible what was actually happening. The situation was we were placed on rafts, open rafts, no guards, no guarding rail, just open rafts, and crowded to cross the Dniester from Ataki to Mogilev. Now, if you can imagine these crowded open barges with people standing one against the other, one little wave of the water and people fell over the side, never to be seen again. Unfortunately, we will never know how many people lost their lives in the time of the crossing. Now, as a little boy, there's certain memories. And I said, this loading on the cattle trucks, really even like cattle. And then the getting out of these trucks with the Germans standing there with whips and the Romanians with whips, belting us and punishing us, if that's the right word, and yelling "Schnell, schnell" to get off the cattle trucks as quick as we could to start the marching to the camps in Mogilev-Podolsk. Now, if you can imagine wet, raining days, people soaked to the skin, little children crying because they've lost their mum and dad somewhere, parents looking for their children. It was absolutely horrible. But these are words that it is very hard to describe what actually happened. It's unimaginable what it has happened. How we survived is an absolute miracle. Now, people, you can imagine, young and old, everybody was frightened. Everybody was petrified. We didn't know what was going to happen to us. And then when the barge landed on the other side, the mayhem began again. Where are we going? Who's pushing us, and where are we? Eventually, we went into the center of the little town called Mogilев Podolsky. We were placed in synagogues, schools, and other public places. These buildings had no doors or windows. They were unfit, really, to serve as dwellings. They were just hovels. They were dreadful. And hundreds of us were huddled together on freezing floors. It's looking back as a child, I can remember a man sipping his little pitiful ration of soup, sitting there with his little cup in his hands to his lips. Other people, because we were dirty, we were filthy, others are sitting there looking for lice and cracking them between their fingernails. There was spotted fever and other diseases. People were just lying there with blank, staring eyes, having surrendered really to our fate, which we didn't know what it was going to be. And there were people that no longer suffered, they were the dead. Every day, a cart came by these hovels, these places that we were in, and the former synagogues, to gather the dead. And they were brought outside. They were tossed into the cart like firewood, one on top of the other. Piles of nameless corpses were buried in a common grave, unmarked to this day. This routine became normal to me as a 6-year-old. Food was minimal ration. The local population of Ukrainians, they hung around us because they knew that we would exchange our clothes and valuable for any sort of food that we could barter with them. It was just unbelievable. The humans can treat one the other. As I said, people survived by bartering food. Also, we were lucky in respect that some of the leaders of the Chernovitz community actually set up a workplace where in a foundry, people were employed and they had a little bit more food to eat. Again, there was not enough, and as I said, clothing and leather goods and jewelry became the most sought after items by the peasants, by the Ukrainians. You can see this roughly dressed peasant in a lambskin fur coat with the conical shaped head. Sort of gleefully laughing at how he managed to outwit the Jew. Now, on the side that we were there, we were hungry, we were starved, but somehow we survived. Now, my mother became sick with typhus. Now, that was basically a death sentence. A miracle, an absolute miracle happened. She improved by eating an apple. Now, question mark, where does one get an apple in a concentration camp? Indeed, where? Some time ago, I was at a Shabbaton, and we were talking about experiences of the Second World War. And a man my age, we started talking like most Holocaust survivors. We talked to each other. Where were you during the war? What did you do during the war? Standard questions. Now, this man whom I'd never met before, his name was Yakov. And I said, Yakov, where were you during the war? He said, I was in a concentration camp. I said, okay, where were you in a concentration camp? He said, you wouldn't know. I said, okay, try me. I'm a guide at the Holocaust Center. I've learned a bit, I've studied a bit. Tell me. He said, well, I was at a place called Mogilov-Podolsk. I said, oh yeah. I said, I was there. Well, of course, he didn't believe me, but eventually, yes, he did. Now, I did mention about my mother being sick. And I bought her an apple to eat. Now, again, where did one get an apple in a concentration camp? You just don't go down to the local fruit shop and get one. Now, Yaakov was the apple man. Yaakov was an orphan who lived in the orphanage in Mogilov-Podolsk. Unsupervised, he used to sneak out of the camp under the barbed wire into the nearest village and steal apples from the trees and share them with the boys in the camp. Now, I was one of the boys that Yaakov saved, and Yaakov saved my mother. Now, unfortunately, Yaakov passed away, and his wife is a very dear friend. His grandchildren are like my grandchildren. His daughter or granddaughter, of whom he would be very, very proud, is studying to be a doctor. His grandson just finished high school, and I believe with outstanding results. Yaakov would have been very, very proud of them. Unfortunately, he's not here to enjoy their success. In March 1944, the Soviet began their offensive into Ukraine, and long columns of retreating German soldiers, they seemed resigned to the success of the Soviet assault. They ran like scared cats. There was a river, the Dniester, still is. There was a bridge over the Dniester. And as the Germans were fleeing across the river, by foot, on trucks, in tanks, the Russians just bombed them constantly. And the river was full of German soldiers, horses, tanks, and whatever. To us, it was just a wonderful, unbelievable sight. And we waited for the Red Army to liberate us, which they did. Then what do we do? Where are we? What do you do? How do you get back to Chernovitz? It became a expedition because you could only get there before there were no public transport in those days. There was no way of getting there. However, occasionally a Ukrainian peasant would allow us to ride on this horse-drawn wagon. It was Easter time, and one of the Ukrainian peasant farmers, they had these funny coloured oval things in colours, multicolours. They were in fact Easter eggs, something I'd never seen before, never mind an egg. And they were kind enough to give us these eggs, and I will always remember the Easter eggs. I will also always remember sweet corn, which even today is my favourite food. Kukurits is the name that's called, and mamaliga is what you cook out of the grinding of the corn. To this day, what, nearly 80, 75 to 80 years after I first ate it, it's still my favorite food, believe it or not. Forget the high quality French cooking. Give me a piece of mamaliga and I will thank you for it. During the walk back, as I said, we were lucky enough to be treated well by the Ukrainian peasant. Why, I don't know. Maybe we were just lucky to strike gentle, kind people. In the time that we walked back, it's a blur because I was only a little boy, and certain memories fade, certain memories are forever imprinted. And when Yakov was alive, and Max Druckmann, who was also a child survivor of the area, of the horrible, horrible death, killing fields of Transnistria, when we used to get together, we were three little boys. We each had our own memories, and they were precious to us. However, I personally wanted to know what I remembered. Was it really factual? Was it imagination? Was it something I read in books? Was it something I was told? Now, Max, Yakov and I decided we were going to compare notes, but not in front of each other. We would each go away and write down our memories. And then we would get together over a glass of whatever appropriate at the time. We would get together and we would read our testimonies just to see if our memories were right, because the Holocaust has been distorted by our non-believing people. Nobody can believe that what the Jews went through. They say, no, 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 can't happen. Now, here are three little boys, average 7, 8, that write down their memoirs, the memories, and they are the same. We remember the same thing. So we didn't make it up. This will live forever. And all the Holocaust deniers, even to this day, including this doctor 2 or 3 days ago that made anti-Semitic remarks. Where do they come from? What's in his head? And a friend of mine who's a Holocaust survivor and myself, we were going to write to the Age newspaper, and we were going to try and get on the radio to say, oh, look, we disagree with this doctor. The doctor is making anti-Semitic remarks in writing in the newspaper. But we were advised not to do it, not to shake the tree, because more of these anti-Semites will come out and said, how are you people, how can you remember what you suffered? This is an educated man. This is a doctor. This is a person that supposedly saves lives, and he's condemned the Jews for telling the truth. I think that's all I can say at the moment. And I'd like Luba to finish on my behalf, and thank you very much all for listening to my story, and God bless you.
Good afternoon, everybody. We shall now go back to when Charles arrived in Czernowitz. It was Easter, which would have been April. The Russians were there, and on the 9th of May, there was a victory march. Charlie's Auntie Clara locked him in a cupboard, would not allow him to join the other children. She also locked his mother, Lisa, in the apartment. She was not allowed to leave because the Russians were raping women, and she was a very beautiful woman. They stayed in Czernowitz till the 17th of March, 1946. I have the documents. They were released several years ago when it was 50 years after the war by the Russians, when Charlie, Corty, we call him Corty, his name is actually Corty, Lisa, his biological father, had 1 week to leave Czernowitz. They were allowed to cross the border into Romania to a city called Craiova. They lived in the city for approximately 1 year. Lisa was working for a Jewish doctor, actually, that came to Melbourne, Australia. From Craiova in 1946, the Bricha took them by foot across Yugoslavia to Trieste, Italy. They were almost turned back by the Red Cross, but they were allowed to enter Italy, and they went to Milano. In Milano, they were in a DP camp, and this is when the Shlichim from Israel started to doctrinate him. Corty learned Hebrew. He went to Italian school as well. This was his first schooling. And this is when the indoctrination started. From Milano Cozzanino, he went to Trani, which is in the southern part of Italy. Corty did not want to come to Australia. He wanted to go to Israel. His aunt Clara, the youngest of the sisters, with her husband Herzig, the Bricha smuggled into Israel in 1946. Herzig spoke several languages and could write and read the languages. He was working with Ben-Gurion to form the State of Israel. When they passed away in the city of Netanya, they flew flags. They had an exhibition to the founding fathers of Netanya. Lisa met a Polish man, Mr. German. Charles took on his name. Mr. German had been in Israel in 1939 when the situation was very dire, did not want to go back to Israel. So Charles was in Italy till 1949, till they received papers from family here in Australia and they migrated to Australia. Has never been happy here in Australia. He always wanted to be in Israel with his surviving family. He's been a very successful businessman. He's done a lot of work in the community. He is the president of the Survivors, Partisans and Front Fighters Association. He is also appointed by Israel the Australian representative to the World Jewish Congress in New York. We still do work within the community, and we are very happy to participate, and we hope that we will be able to participate for many, many more years to come. I think, Joanne, this is basically not the end of the story. It's the beginning of another story, which we should tell another time, about the DP camps. So if anybody has questions or if there's any more information, Courtney will be only too happy to answer them for you.
Yeah, well, I'll just say that we've gone well over time, but I have to say, just from a personal point of view, I had read Charlie's story and I knew it, but listening to him say his story is very different. I don't know about everyone else, but I've got goosebumps all over myself, you know, just listening to him say. And I just personally wanted to thank him for doing this, because I know that not everyone wants to talk about their story. And I want to acknowledge his bravery and to come and share this with us and allowing me to record it and to share it with those who are not able to turn up today. Because, you know, everything like what Charlie was saying, so many people go, you know, it couldn't have happened. And you know what? It is almost incomprehensible what he went through. Like when he was talking about being like cat on in a car, you know, these trains for 3 days without food and water. Like, it's incomprehensible that people would be treated that way. The barge where people just fell off and drowned and there was just no concern about them. I mean, the things that he shared with us, I know that a lot of us will be struggling to think that, how could people do, we know this, we know the stories, but when someone shares this with us, it is very, very, very special. I think what I was thinking about doing, I think we'll definitely have to do a follow-up. I think what would be good is, because we're so over time, is that perhaps I'll see if people want to, I'm going to invite people to give me questions, and then those who have missed today who watch it and then can submit questions, and maybe we can do a catch up in a few weeks' time. And then if you and Charlie want to come back in and answer those questions, because I think some people may sit and reflect and think about it and go, actually, I would like to have these questions. Does that sound good?
Yes, I would just like to add, when they were boarding the barges in Attica, first of all, Charlie lost his shoes. And in Yiddish, there's a word called blotte. It's not mud, it's like thick cement. They didn't allow Lisa to board the barge. She started screaming, mein Kind, you have to let me go with mein Kind. So can you imagine the situation where you've got a 5-year-old boy on the barge, the mother is on the banks. Anyhow, finally, the Germans and the Romanians and the Ukrainians allowed Lisa to board the barge together with Charlie. They crossed together. Also, there was a young girl, a neighbor, 12 years old. You can imagine people they couldn't comprehend what was going to happen. She wanted to go with Charlie. Now, not Lisa, not Charlie. They don't know what happened to this young girl, whether she made it across, but she certainly didn't come across with Lisa and Charlie. This is just to give you a little bit more of an idea of the chaos that was going on, what was happening, what the Germans and the Romanians and the Ukrainians were doing. Also, in the camp, Lisa was assigned to work on the bridge. Charlie was talking about the Dniester River and the Germans flowing down the river. She was entitled to work on this bridge. Charlie would come every day. She needed to give him food. One of the German officers saw this and said to her, if you're going to feed your child, you will not be able to work. Send the child to me to the kitchen. Again, How do you work out the psychology from a German officer? This same German officer hung a Jewish man by his legs because he caught him stealing a piece of wood. So this is just food for thought for people to think about. What was going on in their mind? What was going on? Why this is called the killing field is they didn't have gas chambers. They had the Ansatztruppen. They lined people up and they shot them. There is a French priest by the name of Father Dubois. His father was a prisoner of war in these camps. Over these years, he has been going back to the Ukraine, to the villages, speaking to the village people because he is a priest. He has found 1.5 million bodies. We don't know whether this is plus the 6 million or included in the 6 million. We will never know these facts. Again, these people said they were children at the time. They said we were hiding in the trees. We saw the Germans, the Romanians, and the Ukrainians. They took all the gold, all the jewelry, everything from the Jews, made them get undressed, dig pits, and buried them, shot them into the pits. These are all facts that are coming to the surface now. I think, Joanne, as you said, we've gone over time. We are very happy to have a further discussion with the group from a psychological point of view. It's very important how this affects Charles as a person, how this affects our marriage, how it affects the way we bring our children up, the psychological impact that it has, not just on the survivors, on the second, third, and fourth generation.
Yeah, I agree, Luba. And I just want to add as a personal note that my uncle, I should say was a great uncle, was the last survivor of Schindler. And he never spoke about his experiences. He couldn't. So that is why, I mean, I am grateful, but I'm that little bit of extra grateful that Charlie has come and sharing this with us, because I don't know how difficult it is because we are so blessed to be here. But I am truly, truly grateful that you both have done this for us. It is just, it's just no words. So I just really want to say thank you. I know that I have lots of questions. I'm going to go around and see everyone privately. And then people who watch the video may at a later stage, I'm going to encourage them to give us videos. And we're going to, I think it'd be really good to have another catch up if that's okay with the both of you.
That's fine. Yeah? That's fine.
Okay.
Joanne, I would just like to remind everybody we have on the 8th of December,
yes,
another Zoom in regards to the Wandering Sfardim.
That's right. I was just about to mention that. So very, very different. Luba is going to be speaking with us in 2 weeks' time. So same time in 2 weeks' time. And she's going to be talking about her experiences going around the world and looking at Sephardi, and she's going to share that. So very, very different from today's talk, but just as special. And I'm really looking forward to that as well. So thank you again, Luba, and very big thank you again to both of you and to Charlie for coming on today and sharing this with us, allowing me to record it and to share this with the rest of the Kahila. And for some of our newer members, you may not realise, but Luba and Charlie are a member of our community and have been for many, many years. So
30 years, Joanne.
So we are very, very grateful for what they've done today. So I'm going to sign off, and I again just want to acknowledge and say thank you so much from the bottom of our heart. I know that I am just covered in goosebumps. I'm feeling very, very upset, but I'm also filled with gratitude for today. it's very, very special. Thank you, Charlie. Nice
Can I just
that we
say-
can say thank you to you.
Can I just say
Charlie.
a few words in Yiddish, please, Joanne? First of all, Charlie did not welcome his family Brecha and his family Schmatnik and his family Bruma. Very important to this program.
They were in Israel.
They are in Israel.
Yeah.
I will say a few words to Anya in Yiddish. Charles had a cousin, Uzi. He was also in the camp. Anya, ich wünschte gesinnt, wir sind gesinnt bis 120. Sie fällt sehr aus, als Uzi ist schon gestorben ist. I will translate that for you. Charlie's cousin passed away just over 12 months ago. So I've just welcomed his wife and her grandson, Guy, who will be translating this for her because she speaks Hebrew, Russian, and Yiddish, not English. So please welcome to the family. We hope that you have been waiting a long time for Corti to do this. His name is Corti, Joanne.
Okay. Thank you. I'll share this link.
Is a fictitious person.
Okay, I'll be sharing the link with you very soon. I'll be uploading it to YouTube in a couple of hours. I'll give you the link so you can share that with all your family.
Thank you very much, Joanne. And
okay.
I love to the whole community.
Thank you, Luba. And thank you everyone for joining and participating. I'm sorry we don't have questions, but please write down your questions and speak to me later. I'll collate everything and then we'll have another session at a later stage. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. I really appreciate and really nice to see everyone. And thank you again, Luba and Charlie.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.